Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 56. The Level of a Beast. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Had any other hunter responded to him that way, he would have torn them apart. As a national-level hunter, he had a kind of diplomatic immunity. It was a reward for saving 300 million American citizens from the worst disaster in human history. But his opponent this time was Jin Woo-sung, so he couldn't do as he would like. Thomas's fingers twitched as he tried to contain his anger. He ground his teeth as he glared at Dong-soo. I told him not to do anything. Like he thought, Jin Woo wouldn't be an easy opponent. Seeing him in person confirmed this. If Thomas had to describe this feeling, he'd say it was like being stuck in quicksand. One wrong move, and it would be difficult to escape the dark and ominous manna flowing from the Korean hunter. Yet Thomas couldn't step down either. Jin Woo had an ace hunter of the scavenger guild by the throat, and more importantly, his pride as a national-level hunter was on the line. Thomas frowned as he posed a question. By any chance, do you know who I am? Jin Woo's response was clear. I don't care who you are. At that moment, Dong-soo regained consciousness and yelled at Thomas. Sir, quick! Kill this son of a bitch! Whack! Dong-soo was out like a light, his body limp after a punch from Jin Woo. Thomas's eyes widened at the audacity. How dare you! Jin Woo was acting this way despite knowing who Thomas was. Thomas looked like he was ready to kill. He knew from experience how to deal with anyone who defied him. Thomas had been born to a poor immigrant family in an impoverished neighborhood. As the only white kid in a school full of African American students, Thomas stood out. He made enemies everywhere he went. Often, making eye contact with the wrong person resulted in a fight. Many times, his opponents were armed. Most of the time, it was him versus several people. Though he had nothing else to his name, he was blessed with one thing: overwhelming physical strength, the power to literally step on other people. Ironically, the place where he grew up was the perfect proving ground. Thomas demonstrated his strength time and again, and soon saw how people treated him changed. He ruled like a king. Power, authoritative power, financial power, and physical power. He realized early on that the different kinds of power that existed in this world either made you a king or a slave. So when a new kind of power emerged, he seized the opportunity to set himself up as a king. If someone didn't listen to him, he simply used physical strength to make them submit to his will. He made those who looked down on him bow to him. He crushed anyone in his way. He had learned that physical prowess was his truth, and he lived by it. Time stopped. Then Thomas leaped toward Jin Woo, and the gap between the two instantly closed. As their noses practically touched, their eyes met. Blame your ignorance. Thomas reached out to grab Jin Woo by the head. His mighty grip was his special weapon, and with it, he could easily crush the skull of even the highest-ranked hunter. Now that Jin Woo was within range, victory was surely his. What? Suddenly, a light flashed before his eyes. The hunters of Scavenger Guild arrived in time to witness something crashing through the side of the abandoned factory at lightning speed. Kaboom! It took down the whole wall and skidded across the ground, coming to a stop right in front of the other hunters. They couldn't contain their shock. Thomas! Sir, are you all right? Who could send Thomas Andre flying like this? They couldn't believe their eyes. Steam rose from Thomas's whole body due to the great impact. Had this been an ordinary human, their skin would have ripped off as they slid across the pavement, or their body would have broken into pieces after being thrown through the wall. However, Thomas was completely fine, as expected of the tank who had withstood Kamish's fire. But as he got to his feet, His expression was less than fine. His face was dark as he looked around at the others. They belonged to the same guild, but the hostile glare of a national-level hunter was enough to make his guildmates go pale. Thomas wordlessly stomped back to the abandoned factory, seething. The vice guild master snapped out of his stupor and barked at the other members of the guild. "Don't just stand there! Move!" All at once, 100+ of the world's best hunters charged. Jinwoo clenched his fist tightly after sending Thomas flying. Had he arrived just a little later, Jinho's life would have been in serious danger. When he saw Dongsu smack Jinho's head on the ground through the eyes of the high-orc soldier, his blood had boiled. So Thomas's proposal that they forget any of this had ever happened was absolutely ridiculous. Jinwoo had pushed himself to the limit again and again, so he wouldn't have to be pushed around by those at the top. What Thomas had suggested wasn't even worth considering. Yet Thomas's response to Jinwoo's rejection had been to launch a serious attack. The fight was far from over. Thomas returned, angrier than ever. Jinwoo tossed the unconscious Dongsu aside and summoned Kaisel and Igris. The shadowy winged dragon and knight appeared. Jinwoo carefully picked Jinho up and handed him over to Igris. "Take Jinho to the closest hospital. Make sure they do whatever it takes to help him." Igris bowed his head to Jinwoo, mounted the winged dragon, and left the factory. Kriya? Thomas paid no heed to the dragon flying away. He was focused solely on Jinwoo. Jinwoo's gaze finally settled on Thomas, and how his face was distorted in anger, as well as the guildmates rushing to join him. They numbered around 100, and Jinwoo guessed Thomas had brought every single elite hunter from the Scavenger Guild, the best guild in the world. So what? I have plenty of soldiers too. Jinwoo summoned the shadow soldiers awaiting his call. Darkness slowly spread from underneath his feet as shadow soldiers leaped out one by one. The sight of them stopped Thomas dead in his tracks. They numbered in the thousands and filled up the abandoned factory all the way to the back. Thomas's eyes narrowed. It's not just the numbers either. He spotted several minions as strong as S-rank hunters among them, including a knight wielding a gigantic shield, a spellcaster in a hooded robe, and even giants bringing up the rear. He wasn't sure whether the Scavenger Guild could defeat them even if they went all out. Jinwoo's impossible minions sent chills up and down Thomas's spine. Yet at the same time, he was delighted. The thought of doing battle with such powerful beings sounded entertaining. He licked his lips and smiled. This no longer had anything to do with Dongsu. There was only one way to restore his broken pride. I'll kill that disrespectful bastard. But before that happened, he offered Jinwoo mercy one last time. "Admit your mistakes and stand down, and I'll let you live." Jinwoo responded by flipping him off. Thomas gritted his teeth. "You dare!" The national-level hunter ripped off his shirt, a luxurious bit of apparel made from materials extracted from magic beasts, without a second thought. Crack! Crick! His muscles swelled, and then hardened into bulging armor all over his body. Frighteningly powerful energy flowed from beneath Thomas's feet. His impressive magic power looked like golden steam rising from his shoulders. Here was the mightiest tank in the world in all his glory. After quietly watching this transformation, Jinwoo released his magic power as well. Plum! The sight of the two monstrous powerhouses stole the breath of every onlooker. Oh! I was wondering who could knock down Thomas like that. Their hunters' eyes were then focused on the same thing. Jinwoo Sung, the man who had cut a swath through the giants in Japan. He of all people could take Thomas. The members of the Scavenger Guild gawked at the sight of him. In stark contrast, Jinwoo was cool and collected. This was the perfect opportunity to test how much he'd grown. He could unleash his full powers against them without worry. Jin-Woo suddenly remembered what Kamish had told him. There exist 4 humans who have borrowed the powers of the rulers, right? Perhaps Kamish had been referring to 4 of the 5 national-level hunters who had survived battling the dragon. If so, there was a high possibility that Thomas might be one of them. Jin-Woo made the first move. Go! As soon as their king gave the order, the soldiers charged. Thomas yelled, "Here they come!" It was 1 man versus 1 guild. Nearly 1,000 minions and 100 elite hunters collided. Boom! Thomas thrust Iron aside, charging past the front line and searching for Jin-Woo. Someone came at him from one side at an incredible clip. Over there. Thomas turned, but Jin-Woo was faster. In an instant, Jin-Woo was in Thomas's personal space and thrusted the Demon Monarch's dagger at his waist. But the weapon couldn't penetrate the guild master's hardened skin. Jin-Woo was startled. Pow! Thomas smiled as he slammed an elbow into Jin-Woo. His opponent might have an edge when it came to speed, but Thomas was convinced Jin-Woo would be unable to overcome his defenses. Let the Korean hunter despair after seeing the difference in strength between them. Predicting victory, he continued his attack and held out his hand. Boom. Thomas pulled Jin-Woo back toward him using a gravitational force, like an invisible fist. It was the same ability Thomas had used to yank Kamish's floating body out of the air and bring him to the ground. As the distance between Jin-Woo and Thomas narrowed at an incredibly fast pace, Jin-Woo's eyes widened. Ruler's authority. Wham! Thomas's shoulders strained from a powerful force slamming down on him. What? Thomas was taken aback to discover that Jin-Woo possessed the same ability. Seeing his chance, Jin-Woo punched Thomas in the face a second time. Kapow! And for the first time since becoming a hunter, the man nicknamed Goliath bled. Arg! The Hunter Command Center wasn't just sitting on their hands. Dozens of cars carrying hunters were headed in the same direction the Scavenger Guild hunters had gone. But the car leading the pack stopped short of the destination. Adam, who had been nervously looking out the window, was shaken by the sudden stop. What's wrong? The driver looked back at him. He was the only S-rank employed in the Hunter Command Center. Agent White, please tell me what's going on here. There's no time to explain. Adam stopped as he took in the driver's pale face. The driver had lived through a great many things that had hardened his heart, but Adam had never seen the man wearing this expression before. Adam sensed the situation was dire. Did something happen? The S-rank hunter was firm. If we go any further, we'll die. Jin-Woo tore Thomas's lip open with one punch. Startled, Thomas was sent reeling backward. How does he have this much power? It was an incredibly powerful blow, strong enough to rattle Thomas's head. Furthermore, Jin-Woo possessed the ability to move things with his mind, but he hadn't resisted being pulled toward Thomas. Instead, he'd used it to distract Thomas, so he could throw an unavoidable punch. Thomas's own ability had been used against him, lending even greater force to the strike. What a brilliant strategy! How many battles did it take for him to come up with a move like that? Although Thomas had acknowledged Jin-Woo's power, he'd still considered him a rookie, but this changed his mind. Thomas landed safely on the ground. KRRRKKK. The friction tore at the cement floor, sending dust and debris everywhere. Jin-Woo rushed at his opponent without giving him a moment's break. The battle-tested hunter wanted to strike before Thomas got his bearings, but the American was faster this time. Thomas realized that if he kept minding his surroundings, he was likely to lose, so he threw caution to the wind. Enforcement. Thomas's armor-like muscles blew up even more. Whoosh! Where he'd already been close to 2 meters tall, Thomas now easily surpassed 3. Reha! He let out a shout as he raised his arms, now as thick as marble columns, above his head in the blink of an eye. Jin Woo sensed danger as he approached. He wasn't sure what it was, but his instincts had never betrayed him during a crisis. He skidded to a halt and jumped back in the nick of time. Thomas's gigantic fist struck the floor with great force, sending out a shock wave. Kaboom! Everything within the radius of the overwhelming impact shattered into pieces. The horrific power of the skill known as Demolish compelled Jin Woo to take a few more steps back despite already being at a safe distance. Pieces of shattered debris fell like raindrops. Thomas was a dragon slayer, so his destructive power was astonishing. However, Jin Woo didn't have time to process his shock. "Capture!" yelled Thomas almost immediately. He became the epicenter of a great gravitational pull, drawing everything toward him with massive force like a black hole. Shadow soldiers and hunters alike flew toward the massive hunter. Jin Woo resisted by using ruler's authority. Barely free of the gravity, Jin Woo jumped back once again. Thomas unleashed Demolish once more. Kaboom! Everyone, regardless of which side they were on, got swept away by the shock wave. "Arg! Ah!" Screams rang out from every direction. Realizing what was going on, the Vice Guild Master bellowed at his hunters. "Get away from the Guild Master!" While 3 or 4 of the most agile hunters dragged the wounded to safety, Thomas charged angrily toward Jin Woo. National level meant Thomas himself was a country, so Jin Woo needed to be punished for his affront to a king. Quickly reaching the object of his rage, Thomas swung his fist. Whish! It merely sliced the air, but that was what he'd expected. He was too slow to hit someone who moved like a wild animal, especially since he was in reinforcement mode. As Thomas's physical strength and defensive power increased, his speed dropped proportionately. Fortunately, Thomas had a skill to cover this weakness. He stretched out his hand toward Jin Woo. Capture! Once again, an incredibly powerful gravitational pull materialized between the two hunters. Thomas was convinced he wouldn't miss this time. There was no way he was going to let Jin Woo pull off the same trick twice. Not now, when his body was fortified with enforcement. Like last time, Jin Woo was easily drawn toward him. Thomas made a tight fist with his right hand, pulling it back while keeping his left hand extended and activating the skill power smash, which had enough force to crush an S-rank hunter. His right hand began swinging forward, as if in slow motion. Thomas was bewildered to see the muscles of Jin Woo's right arm bulk up. Was the Korean looking to go head-to-head? With a look of disbelief on his face, Thomas turned up the gravity. Yet Jin Woo didn't avoid it. Rather, he used ruler's authority and ramped up the speed. Thomas spat out a curse. Crap! Jin Woo approached much faster than Thomas had expected. He managed to throw his punch first, but Jin Woo ducked before throwing his own. Kapow! It literally hit Thomas then, as a light flashed before his eyes. This strike was just like the first. Kapow! Thomas shot off like a missile and tumbled to the ground after crashing through the walls of the factory again, leaving a long, deep trench in his wake. Ugh! As Thomas quickly pushed himself up, he found Jin Woo already standing in front of him. Thomas roared and swung his fist. Rhea! Each time he took a swing, it ripped through the air and left a hole in the ground. His attacks were powerful enough to wreck someone's body without touching them. But Jin Woo avoided each strike while attacking Thomas's vulnerable spots. Pow! Bam! Pow! Blood began pooling inside Thomas's mouth. Irk! How can a mage hunter be this strong and fast? As Thomas's confusion grew, so did the damage to his body. Thomas Andre was going to lose? That should have been impossible. No, that was impossible. The strength to overcome his enemies was what defined him. He gnashed his blood-stained teeth. There was madness in his glaring eyes. Growl! Ji-Woo dodged and struck Thomas on the chin. Slam! The American shook his head vigorously to stave off the effects of the impact. But Ji-Woo was already nose to nose with him and pouring on the attacks. Pow! 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 Arg! Thomas, a walking fortified castle, began to topple. He stumbled, but once he got his balance back, he began screaming. I am Thomas Andre. Do you really think this is enough to best me? I already told you. Whack! Ji-Woo delivered an uppercut. I don't care who you are. Thomas stopped his head from whipping all the way back. Furious, the man known as Goliath raised his interlocked hands above his head. Demolish! Kaboom! Thomas pounded the ground with all his might, causing an earthquake. But Ji-Woo was gone. Where did he? Thomas's eyes scoured the area, then belatedly noticed strong magic power above him. He looked up. Ji-Woo had leaped before Demolish was activated and was now quickly descending. Jin-Woo's elbows slammed into Thomas's face. Wham! Dozens of cars came to a stop a good distance from the abandoned factory. It would be dangerous to go any closer. The people emerging from the vehicles were the elite of the Hunter Command Center, each of them a great hunter. However, despite his amazing colleagues, Adam was still anxious, since they might have to face off against Ji-Woo Sung, Thomas Andre, and the entire scavenger guild. The S-rank hunter named Brent commanded the forces of the Hunter Command Center. He shook his head with a grim look on his face. Damn! What kind of monsters were generating this much magic power? Brent didn't want to go any farther, but Adam waited anxiously behind him. Brent relented with a sigh. It's right there, but it's extremely dangerous. Are you sure about this? Adam nodded. Kaboom! Just then, something shot into the sky and fell back down with a crash. Adam looked toward the noise and then turned to Brent. The S-rank hunter's jaw hung open. What was that just now? If I'm not mistaken, there was no way he was, but the hunter hesitated a bit before continuing. I believe that was Mr. Andre. What? But I can't be sure. Horrified, Adam urged him along. Hurry! Let's go! Brent gestured for the other hunters to follow them as he took off after Adam. They arrived at the scene of the collision. Ah! An Asian hunter was beating up the invincible Thomas Andre. Pow! Bam! Kapow! Shocked, Brent pointed at the two of them. Mr. Andre is getting pummeled by Hunter Sung. I can see that. Adam didn't know what to do. He could see from this distance that Thomas did not look good. Brent was at a loss. What should we do? We need to stop them. Are you really going to watch a national-level hunter get beaten to death? Stop who? Stop him? Brent stared at the Asian hunter emitting so much magic power that he didn't dare get closer. However, Adam darted toward them before Brent had a chance to stop him. Adam was an ordinary agent. He could lose his life just coming into contact with magic power from high-rank hunters. Brent hesitated but soon followed with a groan. Agent White! The elbow to the head knocked Thomas down on all fours. His hands dug deep into the ground. Thomas pushed himself up, but he had lost a lot of his strength at this point, and his fists lacked much of their previous impact. Seeing Thomas's sluggishness, Jin-Woo knew that victory was his. The American kept missing his target, and his punches were weak. All he had left was his rage. Jin-Woo effortlessly avoided his attacks, and then began counterattacking. Pow! Kapow! Unlike Thomas, Jin-Woo was still going at full strength. Thomas couldn't handle the barrage. Erk! Blood splattered in every direction. His head was battered. He lost his balance and wobbled before Jin-Woo kicked him into the air. Whack! Arf! The collision of magic power caused an explosion, and Thomas shot up like a rocket. Ruler's authority. Jin-Woo then pulled Thomas back down to earth. Powerless, he tumbled onto the ground. What? Cough! Cough! Thomas lay spread eagle in the dirt and coughed up blood. Jin-Woo got on top of Thomas and started wailing on him, just as he had done to the demon monarch Balan in the demon's castle. Pow! 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 Jin-Woo felt Thomas's resistance gradually weakening. Pow! 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 Jin-Woo raised his fist for the final blow. A desperate cry rang out. Hunter-sung! Stop! Please stop! Jin-Woo's face was devoid of expression as he stared at Adam running toward him. He charged his fist up again. A terrifying amount of formidable magic power emitted from his flexed shoulder and fist. No! Stop! Adam reached his hand out in vain. Jin-Woo's fist was about to connect when Thomas parted his lips. I've lost! Whoosh! Jin-Woo's fist came to a halt at the tip of Thomas's nose. The national-level hunter passed out and went limp, totally spent. Jin-Woo lowered his fist and quietly stood. The elite of the Hunter Command Center slowly gathered around the victor and the fallen. What the hell? Is this for real? Seriously? The reporter muttered to himself as he continued snapping pictures. He had planned to take a few photos of the scavenger guild preparing for a raid, but when they suddenly canceled the raid and headed elsewhere, he followed. But what the hell had just happened? At first, the reporter thought there had been a dungeon break. Instead, he was witnessing something unimaginable. He zoomed in with his camera on the man lying on the ground. It was the unmistakable face of the national-level hunter Thomas Andre. Oh my God! Who in the world could beat Thomas up that badly? The reporter gasped as he reviewed the pictures he had taken. But at the same time, his heart raced with excitement at the thought of how much money he'd get for them. Adam ran to check Thomas for signs of life. Ba dump, be a dump, be a dump. He put his ear on Thomas's chest and heard a heartbeat. He cupped Thomas's nose to check his breath. Fortunately, there were signs of life, but Thomas was barely hanging on. To put Thomas Andre in this condition, how many hunters in the world could do this to Thomas? If this went public, the whole world would turn upside down. Adam had to respect Jin-Woo's power, which far exceeded the Hunter Command Center's estimates. But this wasn't the time to be starstruck. Hurry! He gestured to the healers of the Hunter Command Center. One of the highest-ranked healers kneeled beside Thomas and checked his vitals before casting some healing magic. He then sucked his teeth. Every single bone in his body is broken. The bleeding is severe. I can't do this on my own. We need every healer to work together. With this, other healers joined him in reviving Thomas, but it was like trying to fill a lake with tap water. Someone with Thomas's great stamina required extra effort to heal completely. As the healers struggled to help their shattered patient, Adam stood up. The rest of the Hunter Command Center staffers were busy removing the wounded from the abandoned factory. Arg! My leg, my leg! The elite hunters of Scavenger were in horrific condition. Adam hadn't witnessed who had done this to them, but he had a good guess. A single hunter just crushed one of the best guilds in the world. Seriously, Adam was astonished by both Jinwoo's audacity and the power he had to back it up. Huh? It was then that he realized Jinwoo was nowhere to be seen. As Adam scanned the area, he heard his ringtone go off. This is Agent White. Agent White, we've located Jinho Yu. It was the Hunter Command Center calling with an update. Adam brightened at the good news. Really? Where? The caller relayed that Jinho had been found outside of a large hospital nearby. He was quickly treated in the ER and was now in stable condition. I'll be right there after I finish cleaning up the mess over here. Understood. Adam hung up the phone and breathed a sigh of relief. Phew. Thinking about trying to deal with Jinwoo's anger if something had happened to Jinho made Adam's head spin. Spilled water could not be poured back in, but he counted his lucky stars that at least the cup hadn't broken during the spillage. The good news took a tiny bit of the weight off his shoulders. We're done. The healers treating Thomas stood up. Is Hunter Andre okay? Asked Adam. For now. What does that mean? His injuries were severe, so while his body is healed, it will take time for him to regain consciousness. Oh, I see. Healers had been able to mend his physical wounds, but mental trauma was another thing entirely. Thomas would be spending a significant amount of time in a hospital room recovering from this ordeal. A healer tried to comfort the unhappy agent. He lived through this because he's Thomas Andre, a national-level hunter. If it were anybody else, this much damage would have killed him at least 10 times over. Well, that's good. Adam was about to agree with the healer but stopped. Thomas had survived only because he was a national-level hunter? A chill ran up Adam's spine. Then what had happened to Dong Su Huang, the initial target of Jinwoo's rage? Was he here too? With a stunned look on his face, Adam ran inside the abandoned factory from which injured hunters were still being extricated. Someone called out to him. Agent White! Over here! Adam ran toward the urgent voice, trying to keep calm as he went. A somber hunter from the Hunter Command Center stood next to someone he recognized. Adam groaned. Dong Su Huang! The other hunter turned to Adam. He isn't breathing, and his heart isn't beating. This better not be a joke or a mistake. The editor-in-chief of the best-selling newspaper on the east coast of the U.S. was not happy about being out this late at night because of a phone call from a reporter. Normally, he wouldn't go out of his way for a freelancer like this, but he was compelled to make an exception based on what the reporter had told him over the phone. If it ended up being a load of shit, though, he'd see to it that the reporter rotted in jail one way or another. He was pissed about having to change back out of his pajamas. Seeing the suspicion in the editor's eyes, the reporter waved his hands. It's all true. I'm telling you. 100% real. Aren't you all about the truth? Well, so how much can I get for this? I need to see the pictures first. As if he was afraid of something, the reporter cautiously looked around before carefully removing some photos from his bag. At first, the editor nonchalantly thumbed through the pictures, but suddenly froze, and his eyes widened. How could this be? The editor cast an incredulous look at the reporter, who shrugged and looked pleased with himself. The editor's hands trembled as he continued examining the pictures. The reporter had been telling the truth. The day before the International Guild Conference, and here's Thomas Andre, unconscious and covered in blood. And the man casually walking away after defeating Thomas? That was Jinwoo's son, wasn't it? This was a great scoop. No, this was a veritable gold mine. The editor's breathing quickened. The reporter saw which picture had captured the editor's attention. That's the guy who did this to Thomas Andre. The world would go nuts over an investigative report about him. What an idiot. While Westerners sometimes had trouble telling Asians apart, it looked like the reporter didn't recognize Jin Woo at all. The Asian American editor quietly snorted. Potential headlines for tomorrow's front page ran through his mind. Dragon Slayer bested by Asian Dragon. Hunter of Giants, Jin Woo-sung, hunts Goliath. National level hunter falls to Korea's rising star. Regardless of the headline, the entire world would eat up this news. Plus, it would be an exclusive. Getting a hold of all these pictures was like hitting the jackpot, as these images were worth a mint. The editor's heart fluttered. Seeing the greed in his prospective buyer's eyes, the reporter quickly snatched back the photos. The editor smacked his lips in disappointment. "You've seen the goods, so now let's talk price. How much are you willing to pay?" "It's hard to say." The editor hesitated and watched for the reporter's reaction. "Why don't you tell me what you think? How much would you say they're worth?" The reporter thought hard before he finally held up 5 fingers. The editor nodded in agreement. 50,000? Fine, we can swing that. No, the reporter corrected him. $5 million. At $5 million? The editor was taken aback. If it's too much for you, I can go somewhere else. The reporter turned to leave, but the editor quickly stopped him. No, wait! People shell out millions for pictures of celebrities' babies. So why shouldn't he pay $5 million for the scoop of this century? Once this news leaked, all the broadcasters and newspaper publishers would report on it day in and out for weeks. He couldn't pass up this opportunity. He finally came to a decision. We have a deal on the condition that you hand over everything and any originals, and we make it an exclusive. How's that? An offer was made. The reporter thought about how he'd worked as a freelance reporter living on the bottom rung of society, and how he might finally be able to visit his parents for the first time since leaving his hometown. His voice shook as he replied, "Sounds good." Jinho was no longer in critical condition, but he still hadn't regained consciousness. His breathing was labored, and the morphine didn't seem to have much effect on him. Sometime after the doctor left Jinho's room, a figure shot out from the shadows inside the hospital room. Whyish. It was Baru trading locations, with Jin Woo via shadow exchange. Baru stretched his hand toward Jinho to heal him as per his king's order. Soft blue light spread from the tip of his hand, and the pained expression on Jinho's face soon eased up. Possessing power beyond an ordinary S-rank hunter, Baru had healing magic that was also next level. The ant slowly healed Jinho's wounds in order to allow his psychological healing to begin. Jinho, who had been tossing and turning in his bed, opened his eyes at the warmth enveloping him. He laid eyes on a huge ant head that put a finger to his lips and made a shushing sound. I must be dreaming. Jinho closed his eyes again and fell asleep with a happy look on his face. Meanwhile, Baru quietly continued healing him into the night. In Seoul, Korea, there was a 14-hour difference between the east coast of the U.S., so it was morning there. In a deserted playground next to the swings, a black knight was laying prostrate on the ground, balanced on his feet and forehead. My king, how long must I stay like this? Jin Woo quietly sat on a swing. Until Baru tells me that Jinho's treatment is done. The knight said no more, knowing he had spoken out of turn. Jin Woo shifted focus from the knight to his hands. The backs of them were a mess. Thomas had been an unbelievably sturdy opponent, so Jin Woo himself had been injured punching him. Of course, they would heal thanks to the power of the passive buff health and longevity once he had a good night's rest. I'm sleepy. He felt a little fatigued. The crazy day was about to end on a quiet note. After a while, the Shadow Soldier spoke up again. "My king." "What?" "Please bestow a name upon me as well." Jinwoo looked at his newest Shadow Soldier. LV.1. General rank. Right, he had to name this one too. Jinwoo thought about it briefly and smiled bitterly. "Since you died because you were so selfish, why don't we call you Greed?"